to session 3, Repo Agreements, Product Standardization, Documentation, and Legal Challenges. It'll be moderated by our very own Dr. Omar Hosseini, Chief Executive Officer of the International Islamic Liquidity Management Corporation. Dr. Omar?
Thank you very much, Ms. Hoveyda. Wow. Welcome to session 3 of the roundtable. And again, I would like to begin by thanking the moderators and panelists of session 1 for setting the scene and for the in-depth analysis of the Sharia issue. Really, I mean, the discussion we just had now, with the last, insightful. And I wish I could extend the roundtable, for another day. From, the Sharia scholars, the Mashayikh, I think they are really helpful. And this will actually help the IILM to consider its role as a multilateral organization to play that important role in addressing some of the challenges in order to come up with a cross-border Islamic repo facility. This session, we will focus on the practical dimension of the issues relating to the repo facility. Now, we started with session 1, setting the scene. Now we've had our Mashayikh coming to really address the key Sharia issues. And now we want to look at how do we make it work by looking at product standardization, documentation, as well as the legal challenges. Now, as you've been told, I'll be moderating this session, and I have with me today 3 distinguished heads of international infrastructure organizations in the global Islamic financial services industry, as well as 2 leading legal experts, who have structured quite a good number of repo transactions. I have the pleasure of welcoming Mr. Ijlal Ahmed Alvi, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the International Islamic Financial Markets. I'm sure you've been hearing of, the reference paper developed by IIFM, so this is the man actually, behind the shares. So we welcome Mr. Ijlal. And I would like to also welcome Mr. Omar Ansari, the Secretary General of the Accounting and Auditing Organization for Islamic Financial Institutions, AAOIFI. Again, you've heard a lot about AAOIFI previously in the previous session about Standard 58, which is on the buyback transactions of Islamic repo. And, I think there was also an issue of sale of debt. I mean, that goes into 59 or so. But again, I think our focus is on 58 for today's session. Now, our other 3rd distinguished panelist is Dr. Bello Lawal Dambata, who is the Secretary General of the Islamic Financial Services Board. And again, IFSB, as you all know, has been working on repo. They had this guidance note in 2015. And I'm sure Dr. Bello will tell you more about what they're doing at the moment. I got to know from behind the scene that they're working on something related to what we've been discussing today. The next panelist I'd like to introduce is Mr. Ahmed Chaudhry, who has worked very closely with the IIFM team regarding all the standardization of documentation we've had, including repo. And he's from Clifford Chance Law Firm. And last but not the least is Ms. Ingrid York from White & Case Law Firm in London. She has also worked on a number of transactions in the GCC involving repo. So you have this panelist, and I'm very sure you're going to benefit a lot from their insightful comments today. Now, I would like to start with the AAOIFI Secretary General, Mr. Omar Ansari, for obvious reasons. I don't have to tell you why. Now, as per the existing AAOIFI Sharia Standard number 58 on buyback transactions, I prefer to use that term rather than repo now because we got into the semantics, a while ago. Now, as per this particular standard, what has been the extent of adoption of the standard across your member jurisdictions? And what are the challenges identified so far? And how can those challenges be addressed? Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. Thank you, Brother Omar, for inviting us to be part of this roundtable. And to be honest, it has been a great discussion since morning today. Our morning, it has been honestly a great experience of learning a lot of things. And to be honest, at times I felt that I'm standing in front of a court where AAOIFI is the accused one. So actually, there are a few things that I would say that maybe I was not initially planning to consider in my answer, but I think I need to consider a few things. So I'll just take you a little bit back, one step back, before I start my answer to your question. First thing I would like to mention about the strategic direction. We need to be very clear what the strategic direction of the Islamic finance industry has to be. So, and particularly you, me, Brother Ijlal, Brother Dr. Billo, we all are representing those institutions who are working for the global industry. So we need to be very clear with regard to the strategic direction, considering a lot of different aspects, including for sure the sustainability and resilience and the growth and development of the industry. But at the same time, I believe that we need to focus on one thing, that all these things cannot be achieved unless we make a very clear statement for ourselves that we are here to do the right thing. What is the right thing? We are here to do that. And yes, what is the right thing, how to determine that, what can be differences of opinion on that, we can consider. But we need to understand a few more aspects here as well, that it's, every time we say Islamic finance is very small as compared to conventional, that is correct. Every time we say that it is still learning, that is correct. But it is no more an infant. It is nearly 40 years old in most of the developed markets. It is nearly 40 years or even more than 40 years old. So you cannot give it leverage that it's still a child, it's still an infant, you need to let it learn how to walk and how to run. No, it is actually not only that it's big enough, it's aged enough, it's actually in most of the markets, it's actually earning and giving returns to the stakeholders, including shareholders and everybody. So it's not like that we are just talking about a few growth markets or the underdevelopment markets. We are talking about a global industry which is going to reach $2 trillion, and we are talking about something that comprises of around 1,500 plus banking and similar institutions and a lot more other institutions which are there. So it's not about just letting it grow. It's about doing the quantitative growth alongside the qualitative growth, about establishing the things on the resilient, sustainable, and solid foundations from Sharia, from accounting, from regulatory, and all these perspectives. So it's not only about facilitating the industry. Yes, the standards are important, but let me just take you back on one important point. We are talking about in this whole event that we want to have this thing happening internationally. And now a lot of people are arguing against AAOIFI's standard number 58 and 59. And I don't know why 59 was brought into discussion today, to be honest. I don't know, because at times people try to make grounds about their own priorities. AAOIFI is a not-for-profit entity. AAOIFI is an objective-oriented and a dedicated entity for a specific purpose. AAOIFI has no commercial interest in these transactions. Yes, we are here to support the industry. We are here to help grow the industry on the right directions, on the right and solid foundations. But we need to consider the international scenario. Now, if I consider, okay, we need to be more like, soft and flexible with regard to standard number 58 and 59, for example, it will be a bigger challenge for AAOIFI because it might be good enough for some of the markets, but it will not be acceptable for a number of scholars in number of markets. Even today, we have got those discussions that every new innovation that is coming, copying the conventional. Now, this is, again, to me, innovation which is mimicking others is not innovation. Innovation is something that comes as a new thing. With regard to coming back to your main question with regard to the challenges, the standard is a new one. So the level of application of a standard, alhamdulillah, our standards on the accounting and Sharia side are roughly adopted by 43, 44 regulatory jurisdictions in around 35 countries. So alhamdulillah, it's a very large base. But some of the larger markets do not adopt our standards, and those are the markets who are more active in this one, except for UAE, who has started adopting our standards and is going through a phased implementation, as today was mentioned by the respectable Sheikh Al-Qari also, that Saudi doesn't adopt it. We know Malaysia doesn't adopted. So there are some of the larger markets that are more into repo transactions, except for UAE, they are not actually adopting our standards. With regard to the challenges that we are seeing, the challenge is not only on the Sharia side. The challenge actually is on the accounting side as well, and it goes side by side. When we say that it's a genuine repo transaction, it means that there has to be an absolute sale at one end. Now, what will be the accounting for that absolute sale at the first end? We more recently issued our accounting standard on Wad Khiyar and Tahawut as well, which touches upon this part and which considers that the promise is not a sale. So a promise can be, the fair value of promise in certain situations can be accounted for. But generally speaking, the sale has to be absolute. It is clarified in our new framework. Even earlier framework was clear on this part, but it has more specifically clarified in the new framework as well, that if you go through these transactions, and we believe that if Islamic bank is doing those transactions, we believe that they are doing it in true spirit. And when they do it in true spirit, it means that the first transaction leg is an absolute sale, which means that one party has to de-recognize and the other party has to recognize. And we believe that ensuring that that standard is implemented, the Sharia standard, as well as the accounting aspect of that is implemented in true spirit and true legal form of the same, it is actually really a very challenging thing. We have seen some of the situations in past. Our standard was not clear, was not available earlier on this area. So we, on the accounting side, at least most of the situations we have seen, wherever we have seen that the assets were not de-recognized, which is actually a requirement of the Sharia standard, that actually it has to be an absolute sale. An absolute sale means that you need to de-recognize and the other party has to recognize it. So there are some of these challenges which are still unanswered, and these are actually going to be the bigger challenges, as some of the respected speaker today said, that actually the issue is not with the Sharia standard. The Sharia is there, and we have to find the Sharia solutions which are acceptable across the globe to maximum of the scholars. We cannot just go for the flexible options which will be accepted by half of them and not accepted by remaining half of them. We need to find the solution which is acceptable to almost all of them. You cannot have 100% consensus, but almost all of them. But the challenges are more with regard to the legal part, the accounting part, the implementation part, the clearing part, the margin part, because margin implementation in the sale transaction even is difficult, as well as there are some of the issues with regard to the legal framework, not general legal documentation only, rather even the legal framework might not be supporting that. With that, I know that I may have taken a little bit more time, but thanks for giving this opportunity. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Omar. And I'd like to pose a follow-up question. And for this, I need you to just spend a minute to answer it. Beyond standard 58 on the buyback kind of transaction, and based on the feedback we've received from the leading Sharia scholars, the Mashayikh, in the previous session, we had suggestions relating to open Mudaraba from Sheikh Al-Qardagi. We had other suggestions on the Jara-based kind of repo from Sheikh Burhan. And there are some other structures. In fact, some of the scholars asked us to look beyond the conventional repo or trying to Islamize it, So given the importance of embracing this kind of transactions, are you revisiting your Sharia standard number 58 on a purchase agreement? I need a yes on. Or what are you doing?
First answer, no, because it's called comparatively a new standard. If you see, it has been issued in 2017. However, you need to see that our earlier standard number 25, our earlier standard number 49, and some other standard have actually touched upon the same issues, more or less the same issues, and the conclusion is not different in the new one. Rather, the new one has put all the things at one place. So I would say that I don't believe that we are actually considering an immediate revision of the same. However, I believe there is one, just allow me a second. I think that's the model that the Saudi market is going to adopt is apparently going to be slightly different. And we have seen some other similar experiences in some other countries, like in Pakistan and some other countries. They came up with slightly different models for similar sort of products. I believe that we will be recommending to our Sharia board that they should be considering those newer models and consider either developing a standard on them or like at least evaluating them and giving it comments on them.
Excellent. Thank you for the feedback. And I'd like to quickly move to Mr. Ijlal, from the IIFM. He's been involved in this for the past, I think, more than a decade already. And I guess I'll just pose some of the questions to you and you can just answer. And the first thing is what has been your experience working with ICMA, ISDA, and other strategic partners in your efforts towards standardization of Islamic repo documentation or any related documentation? And a follow-up question here actually is, to what extent have jurisdictions and or financial institutions adopted your collateralized structure of Iyadatu Shari'ah? We got to know now that Malaysia adopts it, and I think it's been accepted across the industry. I mean, so I'm just posing this. Perhaps you're going to give us real life data here today. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah, salatu wa salam ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Very good now afternoon. We started here in Bahrain in the morning. And thank you for involving IIFM and mashallah, this turned out to be a very good roundtable, alhamdulillah. And in terms of our experience, like you mentioned, we took this challenge some time into developing our industry, of course, in a strong footing and widely acceptable Sharia principles. Of course, we look at the AAOIFI itself also and other Sharia boards. And our experience in terms of developing the documentation standards, which was basically some 10-12 years ago, alhamdulillah, now we have 14 standards, and I think Sheikh Arbuna forgot that we have standard number 8 was actually master collateralized Muraba, and then we have standard number later on in 2017 we had this credit support deed, which purpose was totally not liquidity management. So we published our collateralized Muraba in 2014. And based on our documentation, which again was referred, Iyadatul Shari'ah or alternate to repo paper, which defines how the classical repo or buy-sell repos and the conventional are structured, and what are the possibilities to structure. So one element which we did was, of course, the collateralized way, which some scholars also recommended, and we know that is one structure we already did, and it's and I'll mention what are sort of issues with that. Not issue, but in terms of the Sharia requirement especially. So that we did, and then there is of course in that paper you'll notice that there is a 3-party structure which we explored with number of countries, including Malaysia or Turkey or even UAE and some others. So we continue to see if we can find solution. And I think good to know if there is a clearing, like Sheikh Dari mentioned, that could help. So that is something which is there. Our experience has been, as I think majority of participants would know, has been alhamdulillah good. Although, like as mentioned by AAOIFI, our standards are also voluntary. But the use has increased tremendously. In some countries, for example, hedging, we have 7 standards, and those are become global. So now even in Malaysian market is being used now, other standards. When it comes to repo and GMRA was mentioned, we have MOU long-standing with ICMA. And one of the reasons why we didn't do that master yet, of course we have to see SNB structure and see that is something which we can do, is to see the product structure itself. Then you can sort of build the master agreement. That's why we didn't do the GMRA type or the Islamic something which we don't really copy. We develop on Islamic principles. So our experience in terms of developing this has been a contribution to the industry, I hope, which we can see in the hedging segment what we have done in terms of providing at least one alternative in form of MCMA, which is master collateralized. And the uses we have seen, maybe in 14 or more than that countries it's been used. Maybe, as per we are doing survey now again, but some of our standards are used by 100 or maybe more institutions. So it's been, a journey which has been good. Now coming to collateralized murahaba, and some scholars mentioned that's one way, and that's a good alternative, when we did that. The thing which we sort of feedback we receive is that it is based on Rehan principle. And when you have Rehan, naturally you cannot, title transfer. So it is kept as a pledge. Of course, you can keep the security or generally sukuk in a pledge for, global custodians like, Euroclear or Clearstream. Or if you have domestic, maybe there could be some bigger institutions which will provide that service. Or one party could be a separate entity managing that and also managing the margin maintenance aspect. So that is, I think, generally, we have seen it is managed, with a collateral agent. Only issue we sort of get feedback is that, we need the title transfer or rehypothecation. And rehypothecation, if you look at it, is a big issue in terms of, our standards are targeted towards more cross-border. Of course, domestic, like I mentioned, are also benefiting. New jurisdictions also can benefit, inshallah. And they are, but you have to see, in terms of a rehypothecation element, whether it will be widely acceptable. So that is why, the Rehan is a good, alternative, which, we see number of institutions, or even some country levels, even UAE, central bank, they have, indicated that could be, used, and we know Malaysia, other countries. But that, sort of a structure, that is the, Sharia sort of, boundary, which naturally sometime, there is flexibility in Sharia, that you can have, certain flexibilities, but certain areas which are, we can call no-go areas, which is very difficult to cross. So this is something which we to be mindful. So this is in short what our experience has been, and we continue to explore. Like I said, so we have been continuously doing it. We have seen the legal side of it. Although Brother Chaudhary will, I'm sure he will cover. But the other issue we face is issue of jurisdiction. How the local laws are there, and that's also something which you have to see when you do a standard. We have some legal opinions for our hedging standards, but then whether you can do it for most of the countries or in jurisdiction, that's a big challenge. And I think the legal sort of a requirement for the repo is also something which been indicated, and I think that is also to be looked. So this is in short. So if you have more questions and all, I'll be happy to, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ijlal, for providing such insightful comments on what you've been doing here regarding the legal challenges. I guess Ahmed will be handling some of those challenges later, and Ms. Ingrid will also step in at some point, to share her experience. Thank you. Now, I would like to quickly move to Dr. Bello, the Secretary General of IFSB. And considering the IFSB guidance notes of, I think, April 2015, which touches on Islamic repo, what are the key factors to be considered in providing this kind of regulatory guiding principles on Islamic repo? And what are your ongoing efforts, in enhancing this regulatory framework? Thank you.
All right. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Once again, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good morning and afternoon. I think mostly it's afternoon and evening, I can say. So I would like to join my colleagues in thanking IILM for inviting IFSB to be part of this important roundtable. I think the topic is very topical, is very, very essential and crucial for the resilience and the stability of the global Islamic financial service industry. I think before I maybe perhaps Dr. Umar respond to your question, maybe it will be very good for the participants as well as the roundtable to understand the IFSB's perspectives with regard to repo. You know, IFSB, we don't issue, unlike IOP, we are not issuing Sharia standards. We work closely with our partners, and unlike IIFM, also we don't issue documentation standards because our mandate is relies more on prudential regulation. So the IFSB's effort in maybe ensuring sound liquidity management framework is existing among the IFSB member jurisdictions or for the global Islamic financial industry has been an effort that has been way back since maybe just early years of IFSB. The IFSB has in 2008 issued the first technical note on issues in strengthening liquidity management. And this is where the first time maybe some issues were highlighted that lead to the development of repo in many jurisdictions. And I think that Brother Ijlal is one of those that was part of the task force to develop that technical note in 2008. We subsequently, later on in 2012, we issue a guiding principles on liquidity risk management. And in that standard, we also highlighted the importance of having a sound liquidity management tool, and repo was when it was first, reintroduced and relooked into. Now, subsequently, that's when we come to the guidance note that Dr. Omar are talking about, which is in 2015, the IFSB issued a guidance note on quantitative measures for liquidity management risks. But in that guidance note, what we focus is more on the calculation and what is the procedure that are needed, and how do we now establish a collateral, and to what extent these collaterals can be used and be as a guide, and what are the kind of infrastructures in place that are needed by regulatory and supervisory authorities to, boost the repo transactions, not only repo transactions, but liquidity management in respective jurisdictions. And then subsequently, one of our latest work actually was in 2019, in which we issue a guidance note, which is our guidance note 7, specifically on Sharia compliant lender of the last resort. This is the first document where we highlighted clearly and discussed and provided guidance on repos. But we are looking at it from the Sharia compliant lender of the last resort, in which we are talking about the central banks now coming to rescue the financial institutions. So they can structure a repo. Our own perspective, the fact that we don't issue Sharia standards, we always collaborate and we don't duplicate efforts. We recommended that they look at the IOP Sharia standards with regard to repo, and where their own individual jurisdictions have their own Sharia boards and they have a ruling or a guidance with regard to repo, then they should follow that. For the benefit of doubts and understanding of the participants, IFSB, we have currently 187 members from 57 jurisdictions, out of which 89 are regulatory and supervisory authorities, and we have 99 market players. So we cannot stick to one Sharia, one particular Sharia mazhab or one particular kind of structure. We have to allow flexibility. And I think this is what the point that Brother Omar has mentioned, and Ijlal also stressed, that our standards, unlike maybe the Basel standards, which is mandatory to certain group of members, our standards are voluntarily adopted by our members. So what we did in our guidance note for the Sharia compliant lender of the last resort, we provided a clear guidelines in terms of that the repo can be structured, can be allowed between the institution and the central bank as an instrument of lender of the last resort, but the central bank should be abiding by whatever guidance that is being provided by the Sharia board, in addition to their respective Sharia board, where they have a centralized Sharia board. We all know that there are many structures, but we look at the structure that is more generally accepted, in the sense that we look at a structure that is a sports cell, there is a WAD, by a unilateral word agreement or promise by the institutions to repurchase the asset. And then we also make it very clear that it is very important to avoid any Sharia issue, that the regulators should watch out any and come up with clear terms of, in terms of the default criteria that is needed for them to really assess if there is any default that's arising from the, from such instrument. Now, in addition to that, we also provided guidance that the regulatory and supervisory authorities, particularly the central banks, where they structured a repo based on maybe Sharia compliant lender of the last resort, then there should be some consideration that is permitting them to dispose the assets or the collaterals, or the securities where necessary, where they will dispose the securities, and then there is a shortfall in such, then in that case, then there should be a recourse on the whatever assets or whatever underlying, asset that is being agreed for such a transaction. So, but in a nutshell, what we encourage the regulators to do is to have to develop an internal guidelines, very clear guidelines that in what manner that that maybe financial institutions should assess the Sharia compliant lender of last resort, particularly for RIFO. We also establish, request them to establish a structure in which there is a standardized documentation for the repo transaction. There is maybe a clear, framework and guidelines in terms of the application process. We listed down quite a number of guidance that's as guiding principles which the regulators should consider, including even maybe undertaking some haircuts for the collaterals that are being provided. These are things that we clearly highlighted. And then we also think of how this can be, taken further to the Islamic capital market, how maybe particularly repo transactions can be structured. So now, of recent, since last year, the IIFSB will have commenced a new project, a new guidance note on deepening the Islamic capital market. Now, one of the things that we are looking at is the infrastructures. We are not talking about the structures, really. We're looking at the necessary infrastructures that are needed to ensure that there is a liquidity management facility that will promote the transactions or a free transactions, a fair transactions of RIFO in the global Islamic financial services industry. So this particular guidance note that we are working on deepening the Islamic capital market will have to look at the latest developments in terms of technology, the issues related to Sharia, as well as the importance of documentation, of course, will not be left out. Is very, very crucial. So we don't really recommend a specific structure for our members, considering the wide spread of the membership that I mentioned. But we leave it to the individual jurisdiction to decide. The discussion today has been very, very interesting, and I think I will maybe perhaps would like to propose maybe perhaps a very important joint project is in form of research that will be taken at the end of this roundtable as one of the outcomes for this roundtable, to come up with a structure that is genuine, that is original, that is Islamic. And then the challenge that Brother Omar has highlighted is very true. I think many jurisdictions in the past has run away from that copy, modify, and paste syndrome that has actually created a very challenging, conditions for the growth of the Islamic banking sector. Sure. I think if we are taking this to the Islamic capital market sector, I think this is something that we have to look at. Maybe how we can have maybe the outcome of this research, of this roundtable. A number of structures has been highlighted. Some jurisdictions have come up with, and I believe the feedback has been given on the challenges related to the IOFI 15 and IOFI 58. And then I think this is something that we can leverage and we can collaborate and come up with a structure that is original and genuine. And I think repo is not only the issue that we are looking at. Maybe other aspect that will be coming to face the reality is about the elimination of LIBOR. That maybe is another thing that's the rates that we'll be using that we'll be looking at. So maybe perhaps, I don't know, maybe Dr. Omar, for me not take time. I hope there will be an opportunity to discuss more. And maybe maybe
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Bello. I appreciate your feedback. I think I'll be saying a word about that later towards the end of the session about the collaboration we envisage, post this particular event. I think it's important. It's important for us to work together, including the ISDB, which is the mother institution. For all the infrastructure organizations, and I'm glad you're all here.
Yeah. I mean, for your information, just permit me, Dr. Omar. For the information of the audience, yes, for the information of the audience, the ISDB has already made this initiative by bringing all the infrastructure institutions together. They created a platform whereby IFSB, IOFI, IIFM, Chibapi, as well as the arbitration, Islamic arbitration and the Islamic rating agencies are actually coming together as infrastructure institutions to look at some of these issues. So I believe we can take this project to that forum and work on it. Absolutely.
Thank you. Now let's look at the legal issues. We've had issues relating to the collateral, the ownership itself, title transfer, when there's a default, how do you actually resolve that? So whether there's a true sale or not. So these are actually core legal issues I would like the next two speakers to focus on. Now, let me start with Bro Ahmed. You've been working with IIFM for many years, and I think one of the projects you've handled, I think, is this Islamic Repo project as well. Now, what challenges have you faced in structuring this kind of transaction? And how best can you really reflect some of the Sharia issues and suggestions discussed today, in the second session in your legal documentation for repos?
Yeah, thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everybody, and thank you for the kind introduction and inviting us to speak. You're right, we've over the years been partnering as Clifford Chance with the IIFM on creating a number of the Sharia standards that you see, including the MCM, the Master Collateralized Murabaha Agreement. It's a very interesting topic, and you can see the need for standardization just through this very forum where we've had 3 or 4 very interesting structures that have been discussed. And obviously, if we're trying to create a cross-border product, we need to have all these discussions and participants come together to become to a standard form. If I can just take a step back and discuss some of the issues that we had when creating the Master Collateralized Murabaha Agreement, particularly from a legal perspective, it will then give us context and kind of insight onto how we will tackle the same issues going forward for a cross-border product. So I think obviously we've talked about the sale and sale back concept and the position being contrary to Sharia, and we've had various discussions about, particularly in the second session, about whether we are talking about the same assets or for the equivalent assets from a Sharia perspective. I think one of the key issues that arose when structuring the MCN for the IFM was that the sale of those securities that you would have in a conventional repurchase or repo transaction was not permitted or considered to be permitted from a Sharia perspective. So really the idea was, how could we replicate some of the economics of a conventional repo transaction in a Sharia compliant manner? So where we would have the sale of securities and sukuk or other Islamic securities, equities, for example, in a conventional instrument, the suggestion was to incorporate a security framework, an English law security framework, to allow for a similar transaction and have recourse to those securities. So the Murabaha itself is a relatively straightforward Murabaha transaction, a cost plus financing, as we all know, and we've seen in multiple contexts. And then how the security would work is to create within the body of the Murabaha agreement, the collateralized Murabaha agreement, is to create an English law security over those securities. And the intention would be that if at the end of the relevant deferred payment date, the deferred sale price is not paid under the Murabaha, there would be a security framework which was compliant from a Sharia perspective, but also sits well in the English law security framework. So that's one aspect of the collateralized Murabaha. There's other aspects of the Murabaha that we've touched on throughout the discussions over the last few hours. For example, what would happen if the value of the underlying securities were to fluctuate as well. And the idea there is that from a commercial and credit perspective, there would be additional securities that would secure the payment of the deferred sale price under the murabaha. A very important point to note is that under all of the IIFM documents and other standardization initiatives, we need to consider what is the legal governing law of the transactions that we need to take into account when structuring the transactions. Now, the majority of the transactions, particularly in the GCC region, will be based on English law. And the standardization, including the master collateralized Repo agreement, although it is based on English law principle, doesn't actually definitively specify English law, whereas in other standardization initiatives, for example, the recent Sukuk, Al-Ijara and Mudaraba, we do actually specify an English law framework. It needs to be considered on a cross-border basis what is the most appropriate jurisdiction, whether that be for the creation of the debt obligation, so the murabaha, the creation of the security obligation, the creation of the security, and the governing law is important in the context of the location of those securities as well, and for example, the location of sukuk or other securities, including whether they're held through custody arrangements, and then both of those things need to be borne in mind, for example, when we are looking at other structures. So, for example, the structure that Dr. Al-Ghari was mentioning in Saudi, would that be possible to replicate in a cross-border context and to create the same English law framework around those structures? Now, we also know from hedging and other derivative products, Islamic derivative products, that the use of WADs is widely acceptable to also create English law debt obligations. So you can see by analogy there that we could potentially use an English law framework for such transactions. And the other important point that we've talked about is whether those securities being used as, the underlying security, so the sukuk, can be used as security, or whether they can actually be used by the beneficiary of that security. So is the financier free to deal with those securities? And typically the answer to that under the MCM arrangement has been no. And that's discussed in the IIFM guidance paper on the MCM as well. So I think there's some of the key areas that need to be thought about when you're structuring a new product. And then there are obviously various other discussions that have taken place today and various parties have touched upon. So the development and adoption of new and recent Shari'ah standards that obviously are being worked through in the market across different products. There is obviously the wider market issues of the IBOR replacement and how that will impact transactions as well. So there are a number of items that need to be considered holistically and for market participants like ourselves to get together and discuss these issues. And I think it's through this dialogue and the collection of ideas that we have and the thorough review that takes place through thorough testing of ideas through market participants is how we'll get to a standardized position.
Thank you very much, Ahmed, and these are very important points to be considered going forward. Just to let the participants know, we'll be extending the event for about 10 minutes. So bear with us because we have our distinguished speakers here with us. And I'm told there is a kind of a survey, on the chat box. So please kindly check and fill it up as we gradually conclude the session. Now, let me actually move to Ms. York. I understand you've handled a number of repo transactions in the GCC. And globally, what has been your experience working for international banks in the region?
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me today. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and maybe to pick up on quite a few things that Ahmed has mentioned and the other panelists today. Before I start that, my experience is, yes, acting for international banks in respect of Islamic repo transactions, and also acting for local banks who are looking to monetize their assets typically facing off against those international banks in the Islamic repo market, the global Islamic repo market. I would say the biggest challenge, and I know Ahmed mentioned that word as well, and various others have already, is standardization of the documentation. As lawyers, we obviously are very focused on that. I think the publishing of the Master Collateralized Murabaha Agreement by the IIFM with obviously the good work of Clifford Chance is very helpful. But the documentation that we see in the market remains very heavily on the bespoke side of things. And I think the reason for that is that various market participants already, I mean, they base a lot of their transactions on Murabaha structures. Obviously, that's an old structure. Lots of market participants already had their own house documentation for that type of product already, which included perhaps title transfer arrangements as opposed to security arrangements on the collateralization side, for example, or more bespoke, just collateral provisions, more bespoke provisions around valuations and things like that, and also importantly closeout mechanics and the triggers for that, whether it's events of default and reps and warranties. A lot of that was just working off standard sort of house templates, and hence we continue to see a lot of bespoke documentation in the market, which, as we all know, is obviously a challenge for a scaling of the market, and also importantly any legal underpinning, which we, again, as lawyers, are very focused on. We would look to have legal opinions underlie all of the documentation that's put in place between the parties. And hopefully with more standardisation, we will be able to have industry opinions for both the governing law of the agreement and also all the major jurisdictions where that agreement is used. And that would be very, very helpful for both local and international banks to become more comfortable with Islamic repo products. And definitely more comfortable using whatever standardized documentation is available. So definitely the lack of industry legal opinions, and I guess that will come hopefully once we have a more focused use of standardized documentation. Another challenge that we are very much focused on, particularly in working for the international banks into the Middle East, is the basis risk between conventional, or shall we say, GIMRA or whatever people are using on the non-Islamic side, and the basis risk between that documentation or other forms of Islamic repo documentation and the Islamic repo documentation that we are putting in place with a particular counterparty. And so obviously what our international bank clients might be doing is obviously backing to back their trades in conventional format, and so therefore they're very focused on differences between the JIMRA or whatever it is on the conventional side and what they're doing on the Islamic repo side. And so we have various conversations about all the different terms, the different settlement mechanics, all of that stuff, the different legal risks that exist across their portfolio. And again, I think standardization will help bring those markets closer together, and that will be very helpful for ensuring that we have continued increased liquidity from the international banking community as they feel very comfortable doing Islamic repos, as they are able to hedge that risk very nicely in the conventional, the non-Islamic market, we might say. And maybe under the umbrella of basis risk, and just to pick up on one topic which Emma, you and Ahmed have mentioned, obviously, and that is the LIBOR replacement topic, which in 2021 is a very hot topic across the entire global financial markets, and obviously in the Islamic finance market, we've seen very helpfully IFM's put some guidance out, but to be frank, we haven't seen a very large discussion on that topic in the Islamic finance community otherwise. And I think that I'd only beg our participants today to really focus on that, because of the fact that obviously the USD LIBOR benchmarks, various benchmarks will actually cease publication at the end of the year, and others will obviously roll off in 2023, but there will be, based on the regulatory pressure on major users of USD LIBOR, a cessation of use of the entire suite of USD LIBOR benchmarks by the end of this year. And so I think we're all struggling right now to focus on or to have a clear alternative for USD LIBOR. And I think in the Islamic finance market, this is even more important because various of the options that are currently on the table are not appropriate for Islamic finance products, as we all know. For example, the derivative fallback or the standard derivative fallback from USD LIBOR is the SOFR, the secured overnight financing rate compounded in arrears. And we all know that using a rate in arrears is problematic from an Islamic finance perspective because of the uncertainty of the rate. It's only known at the end of the period. So the use of forward-looking term SOFR as opposed to the derivative solution or the main derivative solution right now has been effectively the solution of choice, we might say, for USD LIBOR fallback Islamic finance market. But as we all know, there's been some issues around or delays in term SOFR coming out. We're very hopeful that with the SOFR First initiative starting at the beginning of or the end, I should say, of July, that's an interdealer broker requirement to switch to USD swaps quoting conventions to SOFR at the end of July, that will create the liquidity that will allow the term SOFR to effectively be endorsed by ARC, which is the working group for the replacement of USD LIBOR. So once we have that endorsement, then hopefully there will be a significant step up in the use of term SOFR. But I think the bottom line is that LIBOR replacement is an extremely important topic across all Islamic finance products. And I think in the Islamic repo area, it's particularly important because we just haven't seen that. I mean, ARC has never, ever mentioned the word in any of its committee meetings, Islamic finance, let alone Islamic repo. And as I said, we don't, in the Islamic repo area, we have even less standardization. So across agreements, we have multiple different bespoke solutions to benchmark replacement, and we don't even have a rate that we can point to that the market should all move to. And I think, as I said, it's been helpful that IIFM and others have published at least something to get the conversation started in the Islamic finance market, and hopefully in the Islamic repo market, as part of efforts to standardise documentation, there'll be some really clear guidance or really clear focus and hopefully development of standards around what to do in respect of LIBOR replacement in relation to this product. But it's just another challenge that we are spending a lot of time on as we negotiate our bespoke Islamic repo documentation this year, particularly how to deal with benchmark replacement. As I mentioned, it's a basis risk across all Islamic products and particularly also conventional and Islamic repo. But I'll stop there and hand back to you, Omar.
Thank you. I think you touched on a very important topic as well, which is the LIBOR transition project. And I guess some of the industry players here have been working on this. And I think the efforts have been led by Mr. Ijlal. And I think they have a white paper on this issued a few months ago. Now, I think we are running behind schedule, and I would like to play with the audience to conclude this session. We do have a few questions here, one from Bank Indonesia regarding the new repo structure they have, which is actually based on interbank fund management certificates. I guess we're not going to have time to go through this, but we appreciate your questions. Keep them coming. We're going to track all the questions, and hopefully I will get my team to get some of the speakers here to answer the questions after the event. I will circulate this to all the participants, hopefully. Now, I have to end this session, but before that, I'll give you 15 seconds each to give your final remarks. I'll start with Mr. Ijlal. I saw your hand up just now.
Yes, thank you very much. I can take 30 seconds. So first, yes, IBOR, there is something which we are doing. So after the paper and also very quickly, there is some work which is related to IFM on documentation and some structuring solution we are working on with the work stream. So there should be, inshallah, something coming out on that respect, including on the hedging with ISDA, what we do. In terms of, I think, the structure of S and B, what is used in the unilateral VAD is something which we used in our hedging documentation. So that is something which we have seen, wider Sharia acceptability. So from that angle, I think that product can be looked at. And I think the final point is that, yes, it is right that standardization of documents still, but we have seen less in terms of quite a number of, standard what we have issued, less of bespoke. Of course, in the collateralized, they will probably, some cases I know, some member banks, they said that given their own credit requirement, they might, get the approval from Sharia basis on certain internal requirement to do title transfer. So I think the structure would be, today we discussed various options, something will come out. That's what we are looking forward to that.
Thank you, Mr. Ijlal. Dr. Bello, 15 seconds, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Omar. I think a lot, today has been said, but I think most importantly, what I would like to add is basically to look at how we can have a structure that is standardized and acceptable by all. So I think this is the challenge that we need to recognize. But if we are to have a repo transactions being one of the mainstream liquidity management instrument or as a tool, then in that case we have to also assess the necessary infrastructure that are needed. I think there was a good recommendation for having a secondary trading platform like the central clearing system. I think that was very good. And but most importantly, what I will conclude is for all the participants and this particularly the regulatory and supervisory authorities and even the market players, the Islamic financial institutions, to look at the IFSB guidance note number 7. On the lender of the last resort, Sharia compliant lender of the last resort. We have provided detailed guideline in that on how you will be able to ensure there is a robust framework in securing whatever product or whatever structure that you may adopt for repo. But I think having the robust framework is the most crucial and most important thing. And I will also like to stress my point lastly, for us to have a strong collaboration in coming up with an acceptable original kind of repo transactions that will be adopted by all. Thank you once again, Dr. Omar and the team.
Thank you. Mr. Omar Ansari, I deliberately called you last because I want you to express your strong opinions in 15 seconds.
Thank you, Brother Omar. Just one sentence I will say. We as industry need to ask ourselves a question. If we are here to just mimic whatever is there in the conventional world, what is the purpose of our existence at all?
Sure.
That's it.
Got it. Perfect. Excellent. Bro Ahmed, any views? Final thoughts?
Thank you. Yeah, I think very interesting panel session. And thank you to you, Dr. Omar, and all the panelists. I think we are working in live time with all the issues that we have been discussing. We are working on them in live time on transactions. So a lot of these discussions are taking place and the market is moving in lifetime on live transactions. So we are implementing all of these, whether it's implementation of Sharia standards or whether it's creating novel solutions to deal with forward and backward looking rates. All of these are happening and we're coming to a consensus in the UAE at least on how to take these transactions forward.
Excellent. Ms. York, 10 seconds. Any thoughts from you?
Maybe just to pick up on what Omar just said, obviously the Islamic repo market is not supposed to be replicating the conventional market at all. That's not what we're trying to do here. I think it's a unique product. It's got its own unique important features and it serves a different purpose in some ways. But I think notwithstanding that and separate from that, we have to always have an eye to the interaction between the Islamic repo market and the conventional market to ensure that we can tap into that global liquidity that we have from the banks who, as mentioned, back-to-backing their trades in the conventional market. And then just that interaction needs to always be kept in mind in whatever solutions that we develop on a global scale for the Islamic repo market. Back to you, Omar.
Thank you. And I would like to thank the panelists. And just to respond to Dr. Bello's request, and I think this is it. We're starting today. We're going to work on this product together. So we are ready to collaborate with all the international organizations as well as other industry partners. And, we don't just actually prepare standards. We do not, set standards. We are in the market. So once you develop all the standards and standard documentation, we will use them for the cross-border repo facility, inshallah, subject to the Sharia approval. And I'll like to thank...
You have the money, so provide the money, we'll do the work. We are NGO.
I would like to thank, I don't have any comments on that. I would like to thank the participants, the panelists for their insightful views and recommendations. we'll definitely consider having a common platform to have a deep dive into issues discussed today with a view to deepening the Islamic capital market. I thank you to the participants as I now invite the Master of Ceremony, Ms. Hovaider, to continue with the event. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you,
Everybody.
Dr. Omar. And thank you to our esteemed panelists for session 3.